What is going on YouTube? Chrono here and welcome back to another PSO2 video. So I'll be real with you guys. I already recorded this video. I edited it. I went through the whole thing top to bottom, set it all up nice and comfy, and I scrapped it. I watched it through and honestly it was a little too complicated. Well, not too complicated, but it was a bit boring. However, I'll be real with you, numbers videos are kind of boring. You gotta know what you sign up for when you open these videos up. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to go ahead and re-record this video itself. I'm going to go through everything with you guys from top to bottom. However, I'm going to add a little caveat. I'm going to give you guys a timestamp, one of the few times I do, to skip ahead to what just the raw numbers are, what the comparisons are, what you're looking for, right? In case that's what it is you want to know. Some people just don't want to set these up themselves, don't know how to set these up themselves, don't want to learn to set these up themselves, so I understand where you're coming from. So I'll leave a link in the video description or a timestamp to jump ahead to that portion, one of the few times I'll do it. All I ask is that you go ahead and toss a like on the video, because jumping ahead in those videos really does hurt creators. So I'd appreciate it if you toss a like, helps me out a bunch. I feel like that's an even trade between us. So let's go ahead and go over what it is we're going to accomplish in today's video. So today's a math video. With the release of Slayer, along with the release of potential level 6s, we have got some changes in the weapon meta setup. So I'm going to go over with you guys what those potentials are for these weapons, how crazy some of them are, and what happens when you account for Slayer crit chance, as well as potential level 6. But all that being said, before we jump into today's video, if you guys are new to the channel, my name is Chrono. I primarily cover PSO2 content. I would much appreciate a subscribe as we work our way towards that 10K mark, hopefully by the end of this year. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this. So here we are over on the Visiphone site. Where we're going to start things off is looking at the new potentials and what they have done. So if you guys have never been here before, this is where I gather my information from. Really kept up to date, really nice. Just come back down here and click on Soaring Blades. If you guys are new to these videos, I like to show where we gather this information. That way you guys can go about getting it on your own if you're someone who likes to be self-reliant. So popping over to Soaring Blades, we can see that we have potential level 6 added in. And for some of these weapons, it's kind of nutty. Like, I mean, look at something like Prim. For some reason, it went from 25% to 42% potency. One thing you'll notice is after potential level 4 specifically, you look right there where it shows potency and says 24, and then there's like a colon or a semicolon. Everything before that semicolon is usually what increases. Everything after normally stays the same if it isn't already the same from level 1. For example, you can see that it's 20% chance of rest sign not being consumed. That stays the same across the board. Some weapons, it starts out lower and then goes higher, as you can see for Divista Blade, as it immediately breaks the rule I just told you guys by giving it a higher debuff resistance at 40% for level 5. Most of the time, it stays the same. It doesn't change. But as you can see, Renesia also breaks this rule. It looks like that's insane. All right, well, throw the rule out the window, guys. I guess it no longer exists for potential level 5s and 6s for some of the lower tier weapons. I can tell you from the higher tier weapons, that rule does apply. So the first weapon realistically that you should be looking at for low tier weapons when it comes to potentials, the lowest I will ever recommend anyone go as far as base damage, and then star value when we're looking at like meta choices, is going to be Christia. This is one of the most goated weapons actually in all of PSO2. Everyone should have access to one of them, in my opinion, as an offhand swap to. The only real situation where I can foresee someone opting not to is maybe Force. Realistically, you may not need it, but I mean, even a Christia rod isn't a bad choice whenever you're farming PSC though. I mean, again, Force probably just doesn't even need it at this point. As you can see, from level 5 to level 6, it went from 27 to 42%. It was one of those 42% jumpers, which is absolutely wild, meaning that we'll be pretty comfy using this moving forward, almost probably into the next region too for PSE farming, which is super dope. I'll be real with you. Rugged, I mean, sure, we'll talk about these weapons, but where you're going to see a lot of these weapons shine are weapons that primarily have access to crit chance, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. But Rugged got bumped to 27%. Kaiser, I mean, yes, it has 10% crit rate. Yes, it'll probably have something to use, but it has no fixa ability. So this has been DOA forever. Just leave it alone. Not DOA, but this has been dead for a while. Just, you know, leave it in your storage. Let it collect its dust. Obsidian Blade, yes, but there are better choices. Effulgent and Tenebris were on the cusp of being amazing had they been given the extra damage, the extra potency, but they have their place and we'll talk about them as well. Trunkle, just leave it alone. It gets damage resistance upon critical hit, which isn't really going to do much for you. But it does go up to 37% potency, which is pretty nice. Caclophus, again, I mean, you're really only going to get what, fixed attack 3 for this. I think it's either 1 or 3, I can't remember, but realistically, just leave it alone. I mean, again, good amount of potency, it's 10% extra potency, but unless this is like, I just want to see my weapon currently, if it's worth me upgrading, and this is what I currently have, I wouldn't chase this specifically. Revita Blade, outside of just farming the event, not really worth your time. Again, farming the event, super dope because it comes with its augment, but outside of that, ignore it. Gunblaze is an interesting choice. It went up to 31%, and because it has critical hit rate 10% and has such an insane amount of base damage, it actually does become a contender under specific circumstances, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit here too. Neos Justitian and Neos Astrian. This is where things actually get pretty interesting. Neos Astrian jumped to 38%, where Neos Justitian got left behind again at 35%. As you can see at level 4 potency, or at level 4 potential, it had 32% versus 32%, but for some strange reason, I guess SEGA decided they didn't want this weapon to keep up, so they dropped it to 35%, and they kept this pushing up to 38%. What this has actually done some interesting things, even to the base version of this, and we're going to talk about that too. So yeah, Justine, not bad, but Astrian, those of you guys who had your Astrians, just looking even better. So flashbang warning, we're going to pull up a Google spreadsheet for you guys. I'm going to show you Cakewalk's damage calculator. If you've never seen the damage calculator, I have a video explaining exactly how it works. You can set it up for yourself. If you just want kind of the short version, just stick around. We're going to go through and explain what it is that we're putting together really quick here, and then we're going to jump into the comparisons right after. I warned you of the flashbang. So when we're looking at setting things up, the link to the video, or to the damage calculator, will be in the video description. You'll just click on file and you'll hit make a copy for yours. Before that, you won't be able to make any changes here, so make sure you make that copy. Up top here, we have the levels of critical hit rate up and gallon critical hit rate up for main and subclass. I mean, you just affect or just change the values for main class and subclass. You're good to go there. And then down potential or down pot. Wait, what? Oh, for fighter, I totally spaced on that one. Anyway, and you can see kind of what the full amounts are. Right now we're on Slayer, so we're at 40% base crit, and I'll explain how that happens in just a moment. Of course, main class skill on, blight up. I mean, you can toss shift on as well. Or we can't toss shift on? I'm not sure why I can't toss shift on or adjust these. I think they might be in a different spot. That's why I can't change them here, but don't worry too much about that. The big thing here is going to be add-on skills. Add-on skills make a huge difference in the calculations. Disabling them is kind of wild because you have things like crit chance, crit damage, down crit rate. The potencies aren't super important, but I would recommend putting in your own stats for at least these 3 boxes here and these 3 boxes. I'm sorry. Yeah, these 3 boxes here. This 4th one doesn't really matter as much unless you're curious about your defensive values. Moving over. Now, if you're someone who wants to take a look at things like Tenebris, Effulgent, and things like that, you're going to want to make sure you adjust these here. This is going to be the Effulgent max potency calculator. So whenever you're looking at the Effulgent weapon in this here, we're looking at something like max potency ice. It's actually not taking the augments you have over here. It's taking the augments that you have over here, which mine are not updated. So let's take care of that really quick. Okay, these have all been updated. I actually made sure to update the information in Tenebris, Effulgent, and Trunkle budget, as well as take a look at the Revita seasonal and then Revita base stuff. So this one's kind of easy because it's just base. It's all just flat potency, not like specifics. Nothing too crazy that you need to change there, unless it's like, you know, swap your addy around, which I believe this just counts potency and not specific to your class type. So, but I'm paranoid and make sure to update this information. I'll make sure to ask Cake about this. Again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but this is Cakewalk's damage calculator. I'll leave a link in the video description to their information, as well as a link to the original video going over this. But as far as augments, we have our slotted in here. These are the augments that we use, which is Nil Soul Mastery, Hal Finale, Alt Secreta, and Def Raw Tech. This is not the best in slot setup anymore, I don't think. There's a better choice right now than Alt Secreta. I believe it's like Def Trippable, but all it does is drop off the HP and the damage resistance. I believe there's a better choice for soul, even mastery possibly, but I haven't gotten into the specifics of testing out exactly which one's going to give us more damage overall, so I'm not going to go into that just yet. This is just the set that we had before the most recent augments came out. And yes, potency floor still matters. Please don't ignore it. People get the mindset that when we get more crit chance, it's time to ignore potency floor. Not quite yet. We're getting close to it where potency floor isn't as important, but it's still fairly important. We don't nearly have enough crit chance. So this table here has two different versions we're going to go over. We're going to go over the Slayer subclass version specifically because Slayer sub has access to less crit chance than Slayer main, and then we'll go over the Slayer main class choice. Now I know that's kind of crazy to think about, but we do have to do two separate comparisons because it does change based on how much crit chance you have access to. We're not going to have, you know, this 40% crit rate while we're using Slayer sub. It's going to be closer to 20% if I remember correctly. So if you're in here grabbing this, just so you're aware, I always set this to customize and set it to bossing with enemy level 70. You can choose any of these here. I mean, it's basically the same as choosing this, but this makes sure that there's not funny jank things happening when it comes to damage types. So I always set this to customized, and then enemies that are equal to our current level. Player level also matters because your level equates to your base stats, and then also equates to the enemy's defensive values. So if you're not max level, I wouldn't worry too much about this just yet. When it comes to fighting something your level, I would compare it, you know, on level specifically. And then of course, if you're curious about you versus Gigantics, always set the level to be, you know, 4 higher than you, and then you'll get your kind of difference there. So of course, class skills are going to be in effect, and we're going to go sub. Oh, actually, I guess I should mention this now. There was an issue previously, in case you guys watched my other video covering something like this for just Slayer subclass. I'm mashing that into this video together to kind of cover everything. But previously, if you didn't untick Gunblade before you swap this over, it actually kept the crit value. That has since been rectified and changed. Actually, in the changelog, you can see fixed the bug where Gunblade crit rate was being applied for non-Gunblade weapons. Thank you, Colonel Vexel. Looks like I wasn't the only person who mentioned this, but this no longer matters, so you can leave this checked and you're perfectly fine there. But I'm paranoid, so I'm gonna uncheck it anyway. Let's go ahead and set bow main class, Slayer subclass, and skill effects are in effect, and we should have 20% crit, which we do. Perfect. 3%, 5%, 10%, and then 5% from base. So 5% from base, 5% from subclass, 10% from our add-on skills gives us 20. Beautiful. So let's take a look at our weapons here. So looking at our weapons, we've got Astrian as our baseline, and you know what? I'm going to filter this down to only the weapons realistically you should be paying attention to. So hold on a moment. All right, this is much more comfy. What I've done is narrow this down to the weapons that realistically you should be paying attention to if you're looking at endgame meta in the slightest. So we've got Christia, which you should have a Christia in my opinion. This is just for, you know, for killing ads and maintaining PP or PSE bursts. Effulgent Tenebris have a place at high fixa values, and you'll see that in just a moment. Gunblaze at 60, 80, and 100% uptime have different values. You can see already before we even get into level 6 potential upgrades, these have a place versus base Astrian. Neos Justitian, of course, its fixa levels higher, have a place, and then again versus a light weak enemy, you can see that has its place. Even now, so this is at level 5 potential values, not even level 6. You can see that Neos Justitian Light is already fairly close to base because of the change in potential, and right now is only at 1% difference. Wait till you guys see potential level 6. You got Revita Dark, and Revita Dark Seasonal. So against dark weak enemies, against seasonal enemies that are dark weak, and then just against enemies in general that aren't even weak to dark. You can kind of see how things match up, and this is all again compared to a Neos Astrian weapon. The Effulgent and Tenebris are using max potency build because of course they have access to extra crit chance. Ideally, you probably want to have a max potency build set up with Gunblaze as well for the most part, but that's a conversation for another period. So how does this stack up whenever we apply potential level 6 upgrades? Well, as you can see, things start to get more in favor of the high fixa weapons. Something like Gunblaze with full uptime, which a good chunk of people aren't going to have, let's be real. You're closer probably to 80 to 60%, but even there, you're looking at massive differences. Well, I say massive, but sizable differences between what the Neos Astrian can put out versus what you will get with fixas. Now, this is a baseline Neos Astrian. Keep this in mind. I'm going to show you guys something in just a moment that's going to kind of mess that whole idea. But the short version here is Fatale is almost always your play, unless you're main class Slayer. If you're subclass Slayer, you're definitely going to want to go ahead and go with Fatale. The times that Termina starts to pull ahead are in situations where you have access to extra crit chance. When you have access to extra crit over the previous weapon, so over, like, say your potential gives you crit chance, and then you have like, and it's a good chunk of crit, let's say like 20% crit chance, then Termina starts to pull ahead, specifically in this setup before downs. After downs, Termina absolutely crushes. Whenever there's a down, you get 15% extra crit chance if you have maxed on Slayer's skill. Let's say you don't even have max. Let's say you have, like, I don't know, 15. That's 12%. I don't know. Let's say you have 10. That's 10%, right? Extra 10% crit chance. Slayer doesn't quite pull ahead just yet. In some situations it does, like let's see Fulgent and Tenebris, because they have crit chance already. But like, unless you're rocking Gunblaze, in most situations it's not really going to push ahead. If you have maxed on Slayer, which is 20, the extra 5% crit chance, bam, you start to pull ahead on downs. And that's where realistically you're looking at here. And that's only on downs. Now, this is just for subclass Slayer. Oh, I actually forgot to mention, take a look at Neos ST Light. Yeah, it's behind. Potential matters. It matters a lot. Unfortunately, it's pretty strong. So Neos Astrian is probably going to start to push ahead of even Neos St against light weak enemies when you don't factor, on even playing fields. Of course, when you factor in fixes, it's going to pull ahead because it's got access to a little bit more damage, and fixes are easier, infinitely easier to get on like the Neos St Light, since these drop more often. The Astrian, since you can't sell it, you really can't get a hold of the weapon that you're looking for very easily, so it is a pain in the butt. But with Neos St, you can buy what you're looking for off the market, you can sell what you don't need, you can trade around, so there's of course more stock available to every single player. Getting hold of what you want is a lot easier. Even off element now, where previously, like you can see, previously Neos St Light off element at Fixa Fatale 2 was about even with Astrian. Now with level 6 potential upgrades, takes the Fixa Fatale 4 even break even, and again, in Termina's situation it never does. So you can see the power of these potential level 6 upgrades. They are very strong, and then when you calculate in subclass Slayer, it gets even crazier. Let's take main class Slayer for a spin. So give me 1 second, let me swap things around for you guys. All right, so main class Slayer, just gonna go over a few things here really quick with you guys. Average focus level 5 seems kind of crazy, but getting Slayer focus high is really, really easy. So you're gonna have high focus pretty consistently. If you feel like, you're not someone who gets high focus all the time, let's drop it down to like say 3, right? 3 is pretty average, it's not too bad, but I'm gonna compare it at 5. I'd recommend you just pop in here yourself, go ahead and compare it on your end. Unleash Rage gives you crit chance after you use it with its skill. It's actually like 5% crit chance. Realistically, you're going to have access to this a lot. You do get Unleash Rage pretty often, and that crit chance I believe is available for 20 seconds. So as long as you're popping these Unleash Rages as often as you possibly can, you'll have this crit chance. I personally would have this at 5. Realistically, most people will probably have this at like 4. But if you're like a highly aggressive target, 5 is probably where this is going to be at. So we'll put these both at 5 just to see what's possible, right? So looking before we look into potential level 6 upgrades, as you can see, things look about even. The big difference here for Slayer specifically is that Termina starts to pull ahead by a decent margin. Basically, it's Termina, then Fatale, and then attack. You pretty much always want to go Termina because you just have access to enough crit chance. Now, what happens when we throw on potential level 6 upgrade? Well, it gets a little wild. Specifically with things like Gunblaze, with things like Tenebris and Effulgent, where you have classes that have access to crit chance, getting a bit more crit damage pushes you ahead by a good margin. So weapons like, let's say, Gunblaze, the Tenebris and Effulgent against those enemies that are weak to that actual element with high fixes on them end up doing very, very well if you have them for Slayer specifically. However, let's say, for example, if you're someone who's like God tier, you have a Gunblaze, Fixa Termina, level 5, and you always, you never get hit, you're dealing damage like crazy, right? 7% difference versus an Astrian base. Pretty crazy, right? Super awesome. Now, let's say you got somewhat lucky. Let's say something dropped with, I don't know, an attack 4 that you can multi-weapon to just go ahead and use that Fixa. Welp, a lot of these weapons fall by the wayside. As you can see now, only 3% ahead, 2.5% ahead when it comes to the absolute best case scenario with the gun blaze. So if you have the weapon already, cool, you can use it. Don't chase it. It's not worth your time. Of course, seasonal is going to be seasonal against seasonal enemies. You're going to crush those no matter what the situation is going to be. However, when we're looking at something like Neos Astrian, it's going to be pretty much your end game for quite some time, just because of how much raw damage its potential got. 38% is nothing to sneeze at. On top of that, this doesn't even account for the situation that when you PB, you get even more PP cost reduction, meaning you can push out more damage, as well as you're getting your PBs faster using that weapon. And with these classes, we're also getting PBs back faster as well. So it's worth mentioning that this is only damage we're talking about here. This doesn't account for PP cost consumption. This doesn't account for PB generation either. So when you start to factor all these things in, it starts to show that Neos Astrian is very, very strong. Again, if you have something like this already, it's decent enough to use. Sure, go for it. Don't use a Christie as your main damage weapon. Yes, it'll get you by if you don't have anything else. Let's say you're just pushing your way in. I always recommend your first weapon be a Christia, and then take advantage of whatever else you can go after and build that up over time. But do not break the bank on something like, let's say, a gun blaze at Termina 5, because realistically speaking, you're only about 3% ahead, and that's in perfect play. Even in like non-perfect play, you're paying, whatever it is you're paying for a 0.2% generation gain, 0.2% gain basically over a fixed attack 4 Astrian, and that's attack 4. I'm not talking about, like, let's say, I don't know, man, Termina 3. I'm sorry, Fatale 3. Fatale 3 already trashed this. And then let's say Termina 3. Termina 3 already almost trashes everything. And then we haven't calculated what happens when there's a down. There you go. Now you can see that everything else falls behind. So if you need a definitive answer, what should you chase? What should you go after? What are you looking for? An Astrian with a decent fixa is basically going to be your end game if you can get a hold of one. If not, a gun blaze at a high fixa. If you already have it, I wouldn't break the bank on that. If not, an Astrian just at no fixa is perfectly fine. Maybe you might have a Fulgent, maybe you have a leftover Tenebris that has some high fixes against certain targets. Those work well too. Basically, all this means is that things are a lot closer than they were beforehand. As you can see, if I were to pull this back and drop this to no fixa, the biggest difference you can see here is a gun blaze at full uptime on Termina for Slayer at 7% realistically. A lot of these other weapons, at some of their best case scenarios, are about between 5 and 6%. Nothing is over 7% outside of, the seasonal. And of course, downs are downs. They will be what they will be. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you have any other questions, feel free to toss in the comments below. This was a super long video, but I wanted to cover everything and make sure you guys were aware of all the important information and make sure I didn't miss anything in particular when it came to any specific damage range. Like if you guys enjoyed, subscribe when you keep up with more, and I'll see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace out.